I think the biggest mistake in these areas that anyone could make is buying a property without car parking. So many people think it's not going to be a drama. I've seen kind of buy ones without car parking. Just once again, they sell them quicker than what they should have had to sell.
Our motto is buy without regrets, and so
if you can buy a property that will serve you for 10 years as opposed to 3 years, that will serve you well. It's something.
Buying a great property today, that's not just what it's about. It's also getting something that could be ripe for improvement when the time is right for that investor or for the next buyer.
You think about, right, lifestyle, what's important to you? How do you get to work? What do you need for your family? What amenities like parks and shops? Then you look at the budget.
Welcome to Street Secrets. I'm Chris Bates. I'm a mortgage broker since 2013. And in this podcast, we're going to be interviewing Australia's leading buyer's agents, ones with decades of experience, have the local insider knowledge on the street, and can really help you with your buying process, no matter whether you're a first home buyer, upgrader, investor. In this podcast, you'll get access to Australia's leading buyer's agents' minds every week on a Thursday. What's the word on the street? Welcome to Street Secrets. I'm Chris Bates in the studio with Warwick Brookes from Domain & Co. down in Melbourne. How you doing?
Good, mate. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for joining us today. I mean, obviously we know each other, but for our listeners there, I mean, just give us a bit of an background. I know you've been a BA for a very long time. Yeah, what were you doing prior to becoming a buyer's agent, and how long you've been in the game?
Yeah, so I started in real estate in 98. Prior to that, I was just buying some properties and fixing them up and selling them. And then a real estate agent pretty much said to me, do you want to come and work for me? That was in Hawthorn in Victoria. And pretty much about 18 months into that, I realised that selling real estate was not what I wanted to do because I wanted to be able to represent one party and not essentially kind of take on two people and choose which one is the one you're going to be negotiating with. So yeah, we started doing BA in 2000, one of the earlier ones. I know that a lot of guys will say that 15 years ago it wasn't that known, but 26 years ago it was definitely a new thing. So been doing that for a long time.
What are some of the things you do now that you maybe wouldn't have done, say, 20 years ago? Like, do you feel like you've got a lot better, or have you sort of plateaued a bit in terms of, you got really good after 5, 10 and all of those fundamentals have sort of carried through? How's it changed?
Oh, definitely changed a lot on the way I look at property. It's more instinctual for me now. So I can look at a property. Sometimes I just drive up to a property. I don't even go inside. I just go, no, it's not going to suit. That's not going to work. So I just know instantly whether or not will work or won't work for a client. The big kind of shift, I suppose, from early day advocacy is blue chip inner apartments were kind of a big thing in the kind of from 2010 to probably 2014, of which back in those days, every advocate was trying to buy those. And especially in Melbourne, they changed the planning laws and made a massive oversupply of apartments and really took that up. And yeah, I suppose kind of one of the things I probably do regret in my early days is I followed trends of what other people were doing and believed a little bit in that. And if we had have been buying middle ring Melbourne when everyone was buying blue chip apartments, the clients would have done a lot better.
The best people, reflect on times when they could have done things better, right? That's how you learn, right? You weren't the only advocate that maybe also bought apartments because, they did have a real true, track record, to be honest. But you're right, planning laws absolutely got relaxed across Melbourne and a massive building boom. But that's changed, I think, in recent years, right? The number of apartments have obviously, building costs have gone up. And is that sort of gone full circle a little bit now for some of your clients? And, a lot of families are pushed out of the housing market or couples and are now back into sort of looking at the more blue chip apartments?
Realistically, it's only probably mid last year it started to move properly. So yeah, it has kicked on because, also you've got to look at all the new stuff that they've built is rubbish, and the buildings got so many. I'd say a large percentage of buildings, there are legal battles with builders and all that kind of stuff. Everybody reads those contracts now and just go, yeah, okay, let's just stick to the ones we know that have been there for 60, 70 years and are easy to deal with. So yeah, they're definitely having a bit of a renaissance at the moment, which is good. But yeah, there's still a lot of, the building costs have obviously reduced the amount being built, but there's still a lot in the pipeline.
There will be, the cost of land down there and the planning rules around maybe feasibility can stack up with a lot of apartments. I do think it'll be a challenge for, Melbourne, like it has been in Brisbane. Sydney hasn't had that sort of real supply run up, and probably a bit harder to build, but it's probably going to be an ongoing challenge of sort of Melbourne is a constant, influx of apartments. You've got to be really careful, I guess, in the apartment market down there. But we talk about the housing market where you sort of specialize in sort of the inner sort of east. We don't like to make this podcast about what's happening on the ground today, but I guess when you think about that pocket of sort of Melbourne, how do you sort of break it down, and how do you sort of guide clients through helping them sort of navigate the housing market in the inner east of Melbourne?
Yeah, so predominantly our work has been in kind of like Stonington and Burundara, which is suburbs like your Hawthorn, Camberwell, South Yarra, and those kind of areas are very competitive, obviously. And one of the big things that has kind of come to light in those areas is, so what you used to do is everyone wanted to buy something to fix them up and do their own renovations. And that's kind of completely turned around now because the cost of land is so high and the cost of building is so high. Finished products, more popular than anything else, because it is so competitive. And you're also dealing with price brackets that is not always a rational stopping point on what you think it's worth. So that's why with every property, we kind of say to a client, look, there's a couple of different values. There's what the agent's quoting, which we all know is not right. There's what we think it's worth. This is what we can justify what it's worth. And then there's what it's actually going to sell for. So, and these can have big variations in value. If I'm kind of on a property for a client and it's from our perspective, it's like an 8 out of 10 and it ticks all the boxes, because I've been in the industry so long in these areas, all the directors at all the major companies were starting in real estate when I was starting in real estate. So we know all the guys, so we can call them up and say, look, what's going on with this one? They'll say, look, we've had this many contracts go out. These are the people who are interested. This is what they've bid to on other properties. And that gives us a kind of a judgment to kind of go, okay, we know that they bid to this much on another property. That property was not as good as this one. And what they bid to was still $400,000 above the quote. So majority of the time when we bid at an auction for a client, we're either successful or we're the underbidder. So we're very accurate on price.
It can be a real challenge. And when you say it's a highly competitive market, which it is, right? It's limited supply. I know the Melbourne market hasn't really been moving like a lot of other places around the country, but supply of good properties would still be extremely tight, right? And, I guess when people are, they come on, there's a bit of a sort of seagull effect. People are chasing, and you can very quickly just burn a lot of time and, money just trying to find something. So I guess you're really helping clients there, making sure they don't pursue something if it's just well out of their price point and they're not just wishful thinking. Is that sort of what you're sort of alluding to there?
Yeah, well, most people come to us because of the fact that they've missed out on a couple of properties. They've had the money to buy them, but they haven't gone in actually knowing, okay, what's it actually worth? So they just haven't had that knowledge there to have all the confidence to say, okay, this is going to get highly competitive. And if I really want it and I'm going to hold it for the next 15 to 20 years as my family home, this is where I need to be on it.
You mentioned there like an 8 out of 10 property. I mean, using that same sort of terminology there, what are the things that you put a lot of value on? Sometimes your clients don't put a lot of value on it as much, but when you're thinking about the sort of the investment fundamentals, something that's really going to give them a good life, but B, also give them a good asset to sell one day, what's some of the things you really focus on in those pockets?
A floor plan flow is really big for us, and livability for a family. Light, obviously we're dealing with a lot of period homes, so light can be another big factor, and the cost of maintaining these houses. So it's really from that perspective, because what we do find in Melbourne, and I'm sure it's everywhere else, but history repeats itself. So if a property doesn't do well, it typically won't do well again. So this is where a lot of people kind of, I suppose, fall into that little bit of that trap of an agent will say, they might miss out on an auction, an agent will say, hey, I've got this great one around the corner. They take them through it. They go, oh, we've got people interested. They're going to make an offer. And these people just missed out and they don't really think through it properly. They might buy it. Then you see it come back on the market 2 years later. And the same thing happens a bit. I mean, in these areas, the inner east is a fundamental part of the inner east of Melbourne is the private school network. So a lot of people are buying in that area to be in that private school. In Burundara has more private schools than anywhere else in the world in that amount of space. So you've got to kind of look at, okay, what schools are the kids going to? How does that affect your transport? So you might have a girl going to one private school, a boy going to another private school, and how are they going to get to school and all those different things. So we have to factor in these areas. We have to factor in a lot of those things, and like, where do they go to primary school? So you've also got in the inner east, you've got some of the state's best primary schools. And look, why would you send your kid to a private school and pay all those fees when you can get into top primary schools? So there we're going, okay, if we're going to focus on buying you a home, do we buy in this primary school zone? But that also, then where do you want to go to secondary school? Okay, how does that connect into them getting to that secondary school? And kind of thinking those kind of bits and pieces through as well.
Yeah, that life planning and the schools, obviously, you say that's what people are sort of buying. But your other points there around sort of light, you also mentioned around maintenance. I think that's often forgotten about, right, with these older homes, and, you know, the cost to sort of maintain not just the house, but the gardens, etc. So when you're looking at sort of the properties, what are some of the ones that you really try to steer clients? Those properties that you said, you know, every 2-3 years they come back on the market. You know, what are some of the attributes that often, you know, you mentioned floor plan before, like a really good flow, but what are some of the things that those properties commonly have?
One of the big hurdles in these areas is, yes, we have the most amount of private schools in a location, but school drop-off and school pickup is crazy. Traffic is just off the charts. So when you got cut-through streets and other bits and pieces like that, kind of affects people. You've also got, in these areas, there is social housing through these areas as well. So you've got to kind of understand, okay, where is the social housing? That does, because once you kind of, when you're in like Hawthorne, for instance, you're bordering onto Richmond and you got all the universities. Some people kind of don't like, it's more of a inner city suburb, so it's a bit of a blend. There is kind of, you go across to the Hawthorne East and it's kind of more of a family orientated area, but when you're in kind of Hawthorne near Glenferrie Road, you're kind of in that more in the action, and some people just don't like that. They want to be a bit more quieter. So we kind of make sure that clients understand what pockets are like in each bit. I mean, Q and Q East are two completely different areas to buy in, and looking at really starts restricting transport options. And then you're going to Camberwell, and then you go, okay, do I want more land? You got to push out to Surrey Hills, and then you got to go, okay, these are the kind of the give and takes that we have to get a balance of what we're wanting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the best knowledge does, right? It allows people to get the right property to fit someone's actual life. You know, they can all be good assets, but what's actually going to suit the life that, you know, a client wants, and, you know, throwing a different alternative option to them, you know, and making sure they don't have to pay in Q East there versus, you know, what they're pricing on a Q property, for example. If you mentioned there around those really long-term relationships with agents, do you think that gives you a real, not only around the understanding of other buyers, but what are some of the things that really helps you, you know, when you've known them for so long?
I mean, any property, any decent property, they've had 3 or 4 agents through it. So when it's on the market, I just ring up, I know Giles Craig's selling, I ring up Marshall, well, I got from Marshall White and say, hey, did you guys get through it? Yep, didn't get the property, but here's all the information of what they want, what the situation is. So you've got some advocates out there that I suppose they treat agents a little bit like the enemy, or they kind of make out that we're there, but they're our greatest resource. I mean, having them on our side, helping us out. At the end of the day, all they want to do is get a deal done. They just want to get paid. They don't want to be mucked around. So if you can negotiate and kind of it works for everybody, yeah, they'll just give you heaps of information, which is gold in kind of this environment in these areas.
Yeah, I think they will give you information if you obviously got the level of trust there, and, you know, trust takes time. I feel we've seen new buyers agents unfortunately get rings run around by the agents. I mean, they don't know whether they're going to be doing it in 5 years or whether they can trust them, and, you know, it's going to come back to burn them. And you mentioned a very good strategy, that one, right? You know, if you are selling a property, sometimes you get one agent through, you know, they've probably kept in touch with you every single week for the last 10 years, but often you get multiple opinions on it, right? And speaking to the agents that never got the listing, you know, probably frustrated, more than happy to tell you a few things about that. So it's a pretty competitive world, that real estate world, where they're happy to share that information.
The best thing about real estate agents is it's not really about the clients, it's about the income, where we're opposite, we're just about the client. But they are super helpful because they know, I mean, yeah, we've been buying off them for so long, and they know what we expect. They know what we like. They know if there's room to negotiate, they will let us do that because they know that we've got the data, we know what we're doing. And look, sometimes you get there and a vendor won't negotiate. The agent has no concept of how to do that. But one of the kind of key things that I suppose when dealing with agents, and especially with auctions getting passed in and how that gets dealt with there. So typically when an auction gets passed in, especially for these newer buyer advocates, they don't get the real reserve. The agent gives them a higher reserve than what the actual reserve is, and they typically are there to negotiate back to the actual reserve. And we know this always happens, but if a property gets passed off, they don't do that for us. I mean, they go, okay, this is where the vendor's at. Are you able to get there? And we can negotiate. But I've had situations where I was at an auction and a very, very famous real estate agent in the area, I was talking to him beforehand. I was just watching it, just for fun. I was just at an auction. He goes, "Oh, do you mind just waiting out the front for a little bit, and then I want to come and tell you about a property?" So I was just waiting out the front. Then they took somebody inside, negotiating it. They sold it. And beforehand, I said to him, "I said, what's this going to get?" And he said, "Oh, look, reserve's 1.3. They want more, but we don't have a heap of interest in it." Anyway, they passed it in, come out, talking to him. Then he told me about this property. Probably about 4 weeks later, I got a person inquired about our services, and he said, "Oh, a friend of mine just bought this house recently. I'm kind of looking for something like that." And I said, "Oh, I was at that auction." I said, "What did you pay for it?" He said, "Oh, he paid 1.55. And he goes, I said, "Oh, I thought that's a bit much for you." He goes, "Yeah, but there was a buyer's advocate at that auction who was going to buy it, and the agent said he wouldn't sell it to that advocate if they took this price." And I was the guy. He was standing at the front. So this is a tactic that this agent used to say, "Hey, there's an advocate out there who's going to buy it if you don't buy it at this price." And that's what they do for the newer advocates. Because the newer advocates, some of them need to make money, and they go, "This is what you can get a deal done at," and they pay a price that they didn't have to pay.
I'm all for people starting new careers and growing their knowledge, but it is a hard, any job. And it's such a job I feel like you get better at every year because it's not that many transactions. Yeah, you might look at a lot of properties, but the negotiation and value and the process and the missing out, I guess it's down to your sort of client briefs. And I do feel like it takes some time to sort of get those learnings. I mean, like I said before, I don't like to talk too much about the market, but I think Melbourne's an interesting one to discuss. Obviously it's been a bit in the laggards compared to other states, not pre-COVID times, as a standout performer, obviously Melbourne and the housing market. How I guess the locals feeling, I mean, obviously they've been wanting to sit on their hands a lot, hence why prices haven't been running. Are they starting now to sort of flip and starting to feel like actually, we do want to get our kids into that school in 5 years' time, and, the years have ticked over and we're going to have to start to upgrade, and we want to, even though interest rates are high and capacity is low, like we do need to sort of, make a move and do an upgrade.
It's been just a massive correction in Melbourne with all the landlords selling due to land tax and compliance on properties, and a lot of houses you just can't rent out anymore because you can't make them, some of them can't even become compliant. So they kind of they flooded the market, and none of them were great. So obviously they didn't sell for great prices. People were obviously holding back kind of what's going on. I think the interest rates dropping did help spur along the market. Unfortunately, probably going to get bad news in the next week. So I'm going to be really interesting to see what happens if they start putting it back up again, because Melbourne's in a position where it shouldn't be in reality. We should be ahead of Perth, or we should be ahead of Adelaide. And this is where a lot of investors are coming to Melbourne at the moment. I mean, in reality, Melbourne's getting flooded with Sydney and Brisbane investors. Not really a lot of Melbourne people investing in Melbourne. Sydney, a lot of Sydney people, Sydney's massive. I mean, I've been going to properties, and Sydney advocates are buying properties off agent videos. And you can't even, by the time you try to do your research on it, they go, "No, they've already bought it." But yeah, so I think in reality, on paper, it looks like it's a good place to invest because there's pretty much only one way Melbourne can go. And I think a lot of the land tax issues have been kind of worked through, and everyone's kind of comfortable with kind of where things are at, although they're not happy about it. It's just the way it is, and just got to kind of move on from that.
Obviously this podcast all around very experienced local buyers agents, and I really don't like when a interstate buyers agent starts, trying to buy borderless and, all different states. Unfortunately, they're the ones who just get sold all the duds by all the agents, and it's just fraught for dangers. You shouldn't be doing that if you're trying to engage that type of buyer's agent. But, you're right. Obviously, investors hate paying more taxes, and they've been very anti-investor down there, right? Increasing the quality of sort of properties to rent, which I don't disagree with in some sense, but it has been anti-investor. obviously changing the land tax and reducing the threshold, it's just put another cost on investors. And then you've obviously seen it, a massive oversupply of apartments and, other investors bailing, etc. But rents have been going up, right? And so are you finding that investors are a really strong part of the market, but are the Melbourne's not buying there because they're just trying to waiting to see approach? They're a little bit less optimistic about the economy. They've probably just still under this COVID sort of haven't got the mojo back. Like, is that what's holding Melbourne people back?
I think it's the government in reality, and our debt and the infrastructure projects that, in my opinion, some of them are not required, and that money could be spent in better places. So, I mean, we've got this problem where the government's getting huge pushback on spending all this money on infrastructure that most people don't want, but it's just like talking to a brick wall. So I think the state is very frustrated with our government because they just turn around and just change the rules on you. They're doing a big thing at the moment to try and change the underquoting laws in Victoria, but talking to agents, they're just going to make agents do things differently. It's not going to change anything. It'll actually become harder for people to buy because the agents will have to do it differently and get around the way that the government's telling them to do it. But they're not talking to anyone in the industry about it. They're just saying, hey, this is the way we're doing it.
What makes great investment markets is sort of the stability, right? And predictability of, and I think you're probably highlighting that, the locals are just, I guess, fed up with the government and not confident in how they're going to pull the economy through, but also the unpredictability of how they keep changing rules. How's it sort of changed? That eastern suburbs sort of homeowner though, like often, I've lived in Melbourne for a number of years as well, would have their house in Hawthorn and a place down at sort of Portsea or down on the Mornington Peninsula somewhere. Land taxes obviously popped in. Are they sort of less likely to sort of want to have that sort of city and coastal pattern, and now more, I'll just buy a really nice house? Do you see that sort of mindset shift happening?
People, not wanting to have the big Portsea houses or as much anymore. And that's the thing we're saying, like, the better the house you buy, obviously that's tax-free growth. If you can kind of go down and rent a place over summer, which might cost you $20,000 or something, which would be less than your land tax bill. So I think that, that's definitely shifted a lot, and it's affected those markets. I mean, you can see that those markets have had a big drop after the COVID bump, and they still haven't recovered completely yet. And I don't think that, they're not going to ever get back to where it used to be.
Melbourne were very patriotic, which is fair enough, and then COVID, obviously a lot of people, refugees out of Melbourne to different sort of cities through COVID. But are you finding that, that a lot of people still though are sort of, less likely to do that as well, just due to the affordability, and instead of looking at, leaving Melbourne, are trying to say, actually, no, we can have a good life here?
Yeah, I think that we are getting people who are wanting to come back into Melbourne, but we're still seeing a lot of people leave to go to Queensland. The amount of people that can do jobs in different states and are going to other states, it just really is surprising to me. But Melbourne, definitely getting that. We're definitely getting that kind of middle ring, inner ring, people focusing on having a good asset and sitting on it and just kind of taking that kind of growth bump on that, which is why we're looking at like stuff that's done is just a set and forget.
When you think about, obviously clients have engaged you, you've helped them really understand their brief, their budget. You mentioned around the needle in the haystack at the start, and, obviously negotiation, getting information, around that with the agents. I mean, what are some of the other things where, clients get to the end of the process, they worry, like, I wasn't expecting that, but you really added a lot of value on that journey around these points? Like, what are some of the unexpected sort of real value adds that clients mention at the end?
Most clients end up buying something different to what they first imagined they're going to get. I think that the big thing is that once I walk somebody through, I'm very detailed on walking them through, saying if a property they like, they might send me a link and I'll take them through it and say, this is why you don't buy it, for this and this reason. And they come back and go, oh, wow, okay. And then even if I'm walking through a property with them, I'd say, okay, well, this is going to be an issue. It's going to affect you later on. Just so many little things. Just myself, like, even I've had 3 kids grow up, left home. I've lived in, plenty of different places, and I've kind of, like, all that I've learnt from my time in those kind of things, which a lot of people, when they're doing it, don't actually relate it back to property. But for me, because I've been in property for so long and I see so many things in property, and the really good stuff is in the minority. So you can kind of pick out. But I suppose where I probably make the biggest difference is in those areas, it's more so the young kind of first home buyers when they're kind of looking to spend, a bit weird you're saying this, but kind of looking to spend kind of $1.5 to $2 million. And what they want to buy is not going to last them. So the biggest thing I say to my first kind of meetings, they say, this is what we want, this is where we want to be, this is what we want to buy. And for a young couple who are maybe going to get engaged, going to get married, all that kind of stuff, I say, well, okay, when kids coming, okay, how many kids do you want? Okay, well, this house will deal with one child, it won't deal with two children. And your costs to get into this house and then to sell it is going to be this much money. So the in and out costs of these properties is so high that I kind of say, okay, let's just step forward in thinking and probably change location a little bit, maybe push out, maybe do this, but get a house that you can stay in for 10 years rather than 5, and you will definitely make a big difference to where you're going to be to get to that actual real house you want to buy, which is going to be kind of 3 to 5. Because if you get the first one wrong, it's very hard to upgrade to the next one.
Yeah, no, I think you've it's very aligned philosophy, right? I think being a dad, gone through the journey with kids, you start to build a bit of understanding of the challenges you have with managing, families and properties. And I think you're absolutely right. Like trying to get something with a long runway and something can grow into is really good advice. You don't know what you don't know until you've sort of gone on the other side of the fence and you've gone through the journey, let alone what you've sort of also mentioned there around, the reasons why not to buy the property, and I think it's for you, it's obvious. For them, they just completely hadn't even thought about that being a concern to a lot of other buyers. And, and also you living in it might have, misunderstood it, not even seen that it's got major privacy issues or aspect or whatever it might be, or building issues, etc. So you've hit some key points there. Warwick, if you think about that market in particular, over the years, where have you sort of seen some clients go wrong with, purchasing certain properties in terms of, you mentioned they're obviously overpaying, but, where are some properties that you think they really have undervalued that aspect that you think that, a lot of other buyers want?
I think the biggest mistake in these areas that anyone could make is buying a property without car parking. So many people think it's not going to be a drama, but it really does hold back. And even like going into the future, into electric cars, all that kind of stuff, having access to your own charging and everything else. But that's been massive for us. We've never kind of backed down on that. Single fronted homes, I mean, the only entry into those areas is single fronted homes. They've got to have parking. And I've seen kind of buy ones without car parking have just, once again, they sell them quicker than what they should have had to sell them. And then there's the changeover costs and everything else associated with that. So that's probably one of the major ones. And then the other one would be the main road. So people think you get more on a main road, which is true, but main road properties sell really well in a hot market and they sell really badly in a down market. So, and I always say to people, you don't get to pick when you sell your property. So when I say this to a lot of clients, 50% of my clients are going to getting divorced and they won't choose when they're selling their property. So making that decision right is a big thing. And like a huge part of our business is actually doing divorce work, helping do vendor advocacy and then buying new houses for clients. So yeah, that's a kind of thing I do really make people understand, is that this stuff happens in life and then you may not be able to sell a property in the right time or when you want to do it or under the right circumstances. So always buy the best property possible that will sell as easily as possible.
I think that's wisdom there, to be honest, Warwick. I think you're absolutely right. I think you don't choose when to sell. A lot of people think they've got control. And if you buy a poor asset, that's when you're taking the risk. You buy a quality asset and it will sell well, often in, down markets, and obviously sell well in hot markets, even better. But you really protect yourself. And, if that, whether it's a divorce or whether it's you want to upgrade your home or and I think you're right around the main roads. I think we've seen it time and time again. There's always on a hot market, you're a wounded bull, which you mentioned before, and you're just desperate to get in. You go, oh, let's just do it. And, it'll be okay. We'll put some double glazing windows on, but it's just not simple. Whenever you sell it one day, there's always other people trying to transact and sell. You can easily overcapitalize as well. And you can't do those renos that you want to do. Parking's a big one, right? I think with pre-kids, you're sort of happy to walk 50 meters and if it takes you a couple of minutes to do a lap, you're okay. But as soon as the kids come along, You want to get in that front door as quick as you can, and you got so much crap in the car that you don't want to be lugging that everywhere. So yeah, I think they're great points. Warwick, awesome chatting to you. Big respect for what you guys do, and obviously the longs you work as well, you've done over the years, and appreciate you coming on.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today. We hope you got lots of value out of it. If you'd like to speak to our guest today, there's links in the show notes on how you can get in contact. And if you're buying your first home, upgrading, renovating, or need any finance-related queries, obviously we'd love to help. There's links in the show notes to us as a mortgage broker, and we look forward to next week's episode.